We're starting a new series tonight, and it's on marriage when two worlds collide. You ever had that feeling? You know what I'm talking about? How many of you, when you go to buy products on Amazon or Walmart or whatever, you look for the little stars and you look for how many reviews are out there? Anybody else do that? Anybody take the time to read those reviews? How many of you let the reviews that you read impact whether you buy the product or not? Hopefully, you're spending your time doing it. That would make sense, right? If you had to personally write your own review on not your marriage, but marriage in general, what would your review be? Would it be a favorable review? Would you advise people to buy the product? I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. Because whether you're in this room and you're married, or whether you're in this room and you hope to be married someday, or you're in this room and you're single, or maybe divorced and have no intention of getting married again, what I want us to focus on in this series is not just how can what Peter's going to tell me help my marriage or help my future marriage, but how does this really relate to all relationships? My sister years ago went to a Weekend to Remember. It's a marriage conference that we used to do with Family Life. And she came out of it and she goes, I just never realized how many of the principles that you learn about marriage apply to every relationship. And I think that that's very important because you and I, even if you're sitting here tonight single, we are all involved in a marriage relationship. We are all, if we're believers, we are all the bride of Christ. And so if you're sitting here tonight single and have no intention of getting married again, that's fine. I want you to still listen to what is said, and how do you relate that to your relationship with your bridegroom, Jesus Christ? And if you're sitting here and you're single and you want to get married someday, I hope you take notes. I hope you really ponder what God's Word says. We're going to cover a little bit tonight. There's going to be a lot of questions tonight. But for the rest of us, I want us to really think about this idea of marriage and what is its purpose. And there's no doubt that we need to work on our marriages. If you're married, you know you need to work on your marriage. It's not something that you get involved in and okay, we're married now, so we're done. Right? Can I get an amen? Okay. From the beginning of time, the ruler of this world, that would be Satan, has been trying to thwart God's plan and purpose, and it's no mystery that he would try and do that by starting with the first institution that God created, and that is the marriage relationship. In the first chapters of Genesis, he jumps in there and stirs the pot and ruins it for everybody. If we're going to look at what God's purpose is for our marriage or for our lives, it's also good to know what we're up against. And I want to look first at one verse that really calls us to what his purpose is for us, and it's Genesis 1:28. Genesis 1:28 is when God has created man in his own image, and then he also created them male and female. He created them. And it says here in verse 28, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living creature that moves on the earth. So the purpose for Adam and Eve, and I believe for every married couple, especially in this institution that he designs here, is to fill the earth and subdue it. What does it mean to subdue it? It means to bring it under subjection for God and his purposes and his kingdom. And that is ultimately what our job is. As Christians, we are to live out the Christian life in front of people that want to reject God, that don't believe God. And it's our job to live out our lives in submission to him as an example to them, to where they can see who God is, and that he's really real, and that he really loves us, and he has a plan for us. Ultimately, that is God's purpose. God's goal in marriage is oneness. marriage without oneness, we seem to struggle to be completing God's purpose for our lives. So, a reality check. Every marriage is either moving toward oneness or it's moving toward isolation. So, Peter, that's a pretty extreme view. But answer me this. If I'm not intentionally walking this way, I'm either standing still or I'm going to walk that way. In essence, if I'm standing side by side with Joanna and we're walking down the street together, if we're hand in hand and we've got our eyes on the same goal, we're going to get to that same goal together. But if we're not holding hands and we're just kind of meandering around, are we going to be moving closer together toward each other, or are we going to be moving further and further apart? Simple fact is, without intentionality in our lives as husbands and wives, and even as believers in our relationship with God, if we are not intentionally moving toward that relationship, whether it's with my spouse or whether it's with my God, I'm moving toward isolating myself from that person that I should be having a relationship with. Dennis Rainey says this, he says, oneness in marriage involves complete unity with each other. It's more than a mere mingling of two humans. It's a tender merger of body, soul, and spirit. It's hard to know how to win the battle of oneness if we don't know what the threats are to our oneness, right? If I'm in a battle, it's hard to know what I'm supposed to go do and who I'm supposed to go attack or who I'm supposed to be defending my partner from if I don't know where the threats are coming from and what they are, right? So we know the goal is oneness. We know that if we're not intentionally moving toward oneness, we're moving toward isolation. But I don't know what all of the threats could be that could cause me to very easily end up in isolation. And so that's mainly what I want to go through tonight. As we sit here tonight in a room full of married couples, it's funny because when we moved here 6 years ago, I don't know what the percentages were, but I think it was about a third were a lot of single parents and single people, and maybe a half to 2/3 were married people. And now we have the majority of our church, adult-wise, they're married. But I want to look at these 5 threats to our oneness, okay? And the first one, these probably aren't going to surprise you, but I want you to really think through what might be, because as we're doing this service, or this sermon, I really want us to be looking inward, not just listening to what I say, not just going, yeah, that was a good job, Peter, that was great, whatever. But how do these things apply to my life? Where am I at? And how do I move forward in this? Because again, if we're not intentional about moving toward the relationship, whether it's God or my spouse, I'm moving toward isolation. So the first threat is difficult adjustments. There is little in our culture today that encourages two people to make the difficult adjustments required to achieve marital oneness. I don't think I have to convince any of you that our culture is basically telling us to live for ourselves and get married only if the benefits are there enough to weigh out in your favor. So there's nothing in our culture that's actually convincing us, helping us work toward having a good marriage. I caught a video on Facebook a couple weeks back, and the title of it was Divorce Isn't Bad. And it was from a secular standpoint, but the person was basically saying most people get into marriage and their goal is longevity. Let's just stay married. It doesn't matter if we're miserable. Let's just stay married. And it was interesting to hear her perspectives on marriage, but without a base in Scripture, in the book written by the God who invented marriage, you're not going to get his perspective. So let's look at this. Contrasting backgrounds bring about painful adjustments for a couple in the following ways. If you have a difference in backgrounds in your values, the things that you value, and I'm not talking about she values diamonds and he values guns, okay? But if you have, like Joanne and I, one of the blessings from God for us in our marriage is we didn't realize it, but we had a whole lot of stuff in common. Why didn't we realize it? Because we really rushed into marriage. And so for Joanne and I, all we knew is, oh, we are so in love. This is just going to be awesome. What do you know about her? I don't know. But I'm going to go hunting this weekend, the couple days right before Thanksgiving. Leave her high and dry. She probably should have noticed that was going to be one of my values. Vocations. Vocations can bring in conflict. Especially if they're too high, high position, traveling all the time, big money, going in two different directions. That's going to cause some problems. Religion. The Bible talks about not being unequal, or to not be unequally yoked. Two people that have two different religious beliefs, that can really cause problems. Finances, on how you handle your finances. Holy cow. Most times in every marriage, you've got a saver and you've got a spender. Right? That can cause problems. Your family history, past relationships, painful experiences. That's a whole nother sermon in itself. We also have these superficial motivations. Like I was joking about with Joanne and I was in love and I knew that she was the one, and I just had all these warm, fuzzy feelings, and that's why I wanted to marry her, besides the fact she's gorgeous. But superficial motivations, we can't rely on those to get us through. I remember sharing with a friend's father, one of my friend's dads, and telling him about this girl that I'm in love with and I'm engaged to her, and he goes, yep, you can't live on love. And you can't. And if you're going to get married based off your feelings, the problem there is your feelings change, right? We have this idea that we get married because they just make me happy all the time and I just love being around them. The problem is a lot of what's happening when you're dating is a show. They're putting on their best performance. First problem is it's a performance. It's when you get married that you get to realize what the real reality is in your relationship with that person. Sexual attraction and involvement. To get married for sexual attraction and involvement. I should have a blooper reel. That'd probably be hilarious. Anyway, me and words, they're hard. Not a great reason to get married. The Bible does say it's better to get married than burn, and that's kind of what got Joanne and I down the aisle a little sooner than we should have. There's some information for you. You might write that down. It's going to be a test later. But it's not a great reason to get married. Not even that you want to have sexual involvement. Be honest with you, I went into my marriage thinking I'm going to be able to have sex. And we're going to say sex a lot in this series, by the way. Just in case you're wondering, you might write down how many times I say it, and we'll take bets at the end of it, okay? But in my... I really didn't clear any of this with Joanna, so this is going to be interesting. But I'm thinking in my mind, woo, I get to have sex. It's an unrealistic reality, and it's a very superficial motivation. You want me to move on? Our culture and our family. Now, our culture is shifting. Our culture is saying, don't get married. What's the point? But our families, sometimes our families can pressure us. For those of you who have either spent a long time after high school being single, or family, how many times you go to your mom's house, she goes, when you get married? And you get married, when you going to have kids? I mean, family can pressure people, right? Jesse's slumping down. I didn't mean to. Okay, this is what not to do, Dan and Carla. Okay, just thought I'd clarify that. Also, having an escape from something. So you get married, so I don't have to deal with that anymore. Maybe it's family. It's not a good reason to get married. It's a superficial motivation, and it requires shocking adjustments. What about differing expectations? This is all under one threat, by the way. We've got 5 of these tonight. I'm going to try and move a little faster. Differing expectations. Everybody comes into every relationship with expectations. But differing expectations about marriage in the following areas result in unexpected adjustments. The first is roles. I think Joanna and I struggled with just about every one of these. You see, because my dad was the man of the house. He ran it. He wasn't always a dictator. He wasn't, he and my mom had a great relationship. There was a couple times that he might have taken it too far. My in-laws are a little different. Father-in-law is a great man. Mother-in-law is a great woman. But in the grand scheme of things, she might have done a little bit more of the leading in the family. So Joanna and I came into this marriage with differing ideas of who's supposed to do what. And that causes problems. And it doesn't mean that the wife can't lead. I need my wife to help me lead. But differing roles. Expressions of love. This is something I didn't have any clue about. How many of you have read the book 5 Love Languages, or you've at least heard of it? It's a great book. It'll give you great insight as to what speaks love to your spouse or to anybody that you're wanting to nurture a relationship with. Joanna's love language is very different than mine. Mine is very different than hers. We tend to speak the love language that we want to receive, and vice versa. And so just expressions of love, sexual performance, expectations of what that's going to be. And if they're differing, if they're off, it can cause some real struggles. Plans for the future. You ever get into your marriage and you've got 2 different plans, 2 different courses? I think I'm going this way. Joanna thought we were going this way. We can still experience that today. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that we had a good fight. A lot of you laughed. Maybe some of you gasped. I don't know. You need to know that everything I'm going to tell you, and hopefully I don't tell you things that I'm not supposed to. But Joanna and I are real people. We're not perfect. We have plenty of struggles. But we've been down the road of a marriage that was almost in the books as a divorce, and God resurrected it out of the dead, out of the pit. When couples fail to make necessary adjustments to move toward oneness, the result is isolation. Threat number 2, our culture's pattern. Our culture's pattern is the 50-50 performance relationship. Anybody else ever hear in a marriage, well, he didn't do this, so I'm not going to do that? Have you ever said it? The only problem with saying I'll meet you halfway is one of you is going to be a bad judge of distance. Acceptance is based upon performance. You did your part, I'll do mine. Giving is based upon merit. Affection is given when one feels it is deserved. That doesn't sound like me serving Joanna, does it? If she does something that ticks me off, and I withhold my love from her, and I withhold affection and honor and cherishing her, does that sound like the way Jesus calls us to love each other? No. It's not 50-50. It's 100 and 100. You can't get to the end of a marriage and say, I gave it everything I got. I did my 50%. Right? It takes 100 and 100. 100% from each one. Motivation is for action based upon how one feels. Our culture's pattern is destined to self-destruct because, first of all, my inability one of my inabilities is to meet unrealistic or unimaginable expectations. I may have the expectation that Joanna's going to clean the toilet every single day. Is that realistic? And that's a silly expectation. Going back to sexual performance, if we have an unrealistic expectation of what that's going to be like, and she is not able to fulfill that, then unless we grasp reality and talk with her and really communicate about what is healthy and what can be done, then we are never going to have oneness in our sexual relationship because of that unrealistic expectation that we might have. Also because of my tendency to focus on the weakness of my spouse. If I'm always concerned about what they did they do their part? Well, you did that. And that wasn't really part of the deal, but I'm going to hold it against you anyway. How many of us really have to work hard in seeing the negative in our spouse? I honestly believe that comes very naturally in our flesh. That's why we need a supernatural God to come in and intervene and give us the power to go, yeah, they messed up, but you're pretty screwed up too, so you just need to love her, or you just need to love him. I'm going to say her a lot because I'm a man, and that's just kind of my position in this. Hope you know it goes both ways. My disappointment in my spouse oftentimes will paralyze my performance. She's not doing her part. That means I can back off. I'll show her, I'll prove to her, and bring it to her attention of how bad she's doing because I'm going to not do my part. And once she comes down on me for not doing my part, I can say, well, I've got a list of everything you haven't done. 1 Corinthians 13 says, love does not keep a record of wrongs. It hopes all things and believes all things. My desire to get revenge is another way that the culture's pattern will self-destruct. When we get hurt, our initial fleshly reaction is we want to hurt other people. We want to hurt that person that hurt me. Why? Because injustice was done and justice needs to be rectified, and I'm going to be the one to carry it out. That is not how God works. God says, bless those who curse you. Bless and do not curse them. If they want to drink, give it to them. If they say, walk with me a mile, walk with them 2 miles. By doing so, you will heap burning coals on their head. And that doesn't mean you get them back. Burning coals sounds like a good vengeance. He's saying, you bless them, and I will bring to remembrance all the wrong that they've done, if there's any wrong been done. The impossibility of knowing if my spouse has met me halfway, that will cause it to self-destruct. This is also a recipe for isolation. Threat number 3, inevitable difficulties. How many of you have experienced inevitable difficulties in your marriage? Every hand should probably be up. Right? The crazy thing is I know a lot of stories in here. I don't know them all. But I know Elaine was in a car accident a while back. You probably didn't see that coming, did you? You probably didn't see how that one accident was going to change your life. Inevitable difficulties, unexpected difficulties. There are 2 failures in our response to difficulty. There is a failure to anticipate the certainty of difficulties and problems, and there is a failure to respond properly to difficulties and problems. Difficulties do not mean something is wrong in your marriage. By the way, if you are married, there is something wrong in your marriage. So we shouldn't keep ourselves isolated. We shouldn't keep we shouldn't just keep it all to ourselves and not share it with anybody in fear that somebody find out that you have an imperfect marriage. Join the club. We all have an imperfect marriage. We all struggle. That's why I want us to be in community together, guys. Not so we can just air our dirty laundry. It needs to be done a certain way. But to be in each other's lives, like our small group, they kind of pick up on real quick. And I hope you do too, that Joanna and I don't have the perfect marriage. Nor will we ever. But we can have one that is consistently striving for oneness. Again, you're either moving toward it or you're moving toward isolation. Your response to difficulties will either drive you apart or bind you together. Some respond to problems by trying to suppress or escape them, escape the pressure. How might you escape? My escape in my marriage was pornography. My escape, because here's the thing, I could either move toward my wife where there's conflict and there's problems, or I can go where there is no rejection. There's this made-up world where there's no problems because I don't actually have a relationship over there. Does that make sense? It's an escape. Maybe your escape is alcohol. Maybe you have a fight with your wife and you just want to go have a good drink. Our escape, if we're going to turn away from our spouse to turn anywhere, it should be to turn to Jesus and go, I need your help. He's the only one that can give us what I need to be able to turn back to her when things get rough. He's the only one that's going to give me the power to be able to love her and approach her in the way that I need to. And not just focus on my own selfishness. We'll get to that in a minute. Others respond to problems by blaming or attacking others. Blame shifting. I know I've done that. I'm probably one of the most defensive people when it comes to my marriage. I have a very low self-esteem, if that's even a thing. I have a very low opinion of myself, we'll say that. I see how much I screw up. I forget things. I can't remember where I put things. I forget to do things that my wife needs me to do. And so when I'm questioned, I almost immediately get defensive. And if I'm not careful, I can turn and attack her. You just need to know that. As your pastor, that's me confessing that to you. Okay? You must have a plan to move through these times without rejecting or withdrawing from your spouse. And when couples fail to grasp God's perspective on difficulties and problems, the result is isolation. The fourth threat, and this is not going to be a surprise. When I say it, you're going to go, well, that's kind of a no-brainer. Extramarital affairs. And adultery is only one part of that. What do I mean? I mean activity affairs. Activity affairs. Not only was I addicted to pornography, but the night that Joanna went into labor with Jacob, I was at work playing video games. It's a real winner. Activity affairs. It may be hunting, it may be fishing, it may be skiing, it may be mountain biking, it may be any activity that takes me away from having to deal with my spouse, and I can go have fun and I can go do whatever I want to do, and I don't have to think about any of those problems. Yes, I come back to it, but then maybe I've got my escape there handy, and I can just run to that. Activities affair. What about materialism? I think that's something that as humans, we wrestle with materialism. Well, if I just have that scope on my gun, I'll be happy. If I can just get that one side-by-side, I really do kind of want a side-by-side, but anyway, if I could just get that one that did such and such, then man, life would be good. And then I could go have my activity affair doing that, and hope I'm not stepping on too many of your toes. I don't know, maybe I do. Maybe I am. A career affair. Part of my staying at work and playing video games, part of my loving having to go to school every night for 4 years, I didn't have to be home dealing with my wife. Dealing with my broken relationship. Thinking in my mind half the time that it was her fault anyway. I had every justification in my head as to what was wrong in our marriage. And I would point the finger at her for most of it. I'm just telling you what it was. A career affair. Maybe I can just go do this and not have to deal with it. A family affair. You say, what in the world is a family affair? A marriage is part of the family. What about your kids? One of the biggest epidemics that we have right now in the United States of America, and especially in the church, is we have parents that focus so much on their kids that by the time they're empty nesters, they don't even know who each other are. They have spent their life pouring into their kids so much that they really don't even have a relationship with their spouse. And this is just an observation. For those that have been raised by single parents, it's really easy for that person's marriage to face real struggles, if not end up in divorce. And here's the train of thought on that. You start facing difficulties and you think, well, I turned out okay. My kids will turn out okay too. That's harsh. But it's a reality. All of this that I'm talking about are threats that when they're plagued on our flesh and we give in, can end up in isolation, if not divorce. I want to pause right there for a second because I also realize in this day and age, there's a lot of people that have been married multiple times. And I want to clarify something really quickly. Because if I don't, you're going to feel like I'm judging you. I want you to know that I'm not. Things happen. And what I believe is God is more concerned about how you are going to make the marriage that you're in right now work than He is about what happened in your past marriages. You probably need to take an inventory of what happened in those marriages and figure out how those same traits that you bring into your new marriage is going to affect it. But God is not sitting here judging you because you've been married multiple times. He just wants this marriage to be the one that brings Him glory. Okay? Is that fair? All right. Fantasy affair. This is where mine came into play. Pornography, and I would even include romantic novels for ladies. And maybe even, Hallmark movies. The guy always gets the girl. Guys are never that romantic. I'm sorry. It's just not real. Here's the bottom line on that, on the fantasies. It is a false reality. It's a false reality. Guys, if you're looking at pornography right now, and statistics say that about 70% of church-going men are looking at pornography on a regular basis. 70%. If you're looking at pornography and you are unsatisfied in your sexual relationship with your wife, it is because you have an unhealthy reality, an unhealthy sexual appetite. You are taking something that God intended to be pure and beautiful, and you're polluting it with filth. I want to challenge you right now to give it up. Because it's doing nothing but killing your marriage. I speak from experience. And ultimately, the love affair, the adulterous love affair. I don't think I have to expound on how that destroys. We are seduced by our culture into believing that we deserve complete fulfillment and perfect happiness. Anybody ever hear that? There's a really, really good book called Sacred Marriage. It's by Gary Thomas, and the subtitle is, What if God gave you marriage not to make you happy, but to make you holy? Marriage is given to you so that you can figure out what's wrong with you and how God gave you your spouse to start the sanctifying process. Okay? That's why God gave me Joanna. But if we focus on our complete fulfillment and our perfect happiness, that's going to be destroyed like in the first month, guys. How many of you, your honeymoon lasted about 2 weeks? I remember being in our bedroom. You remember this? In our bedroom, and we had just had this knockdown, drag-out fight, and I'm thinking, what in the world did I just do? And I'm sobbing. You can't imagine me crying. But I'm sobbing in our bedroom, and I go to breathe, and Joanna's hair shoots down my throat. It was disturbing. I'm like, ugh. Totally didn't plan on telling that story. Here's the bottom line with our culture. Our culture programs us. How many of you have felt programmed over the last 10 months? One way or another, good or bad. People develop an improper perception of reality. People compare their expectations and fantasies to real life. People begin to question reality, not their fantasies. I had this idea in my head of what the perfect woman would be. And I go to cling to that instead of cling to the reality that God made me and He called me to love this woman. And she's my reality. And yeah, she's imperfect, but so am I. The problem in your marriage is not that you are married to a sinner. It's that you're a sinner. People escape to extramarital affairs, and people ultimately end up in isolation. When couples escape to extramarital affairs, the result is isolation. The fifth and final threat is selfishness. How many of you are selfish? I better see every single hand go up. Come on. I'm going to hold mine up until you put it up. How many of you are selfish? Jason, come on. I'll call you out. I don't care. 2 up. That's about right. I didn't see it. I apologize. Everyone has a natural tendency to be self-centered and destructive in relationships. Sin does that to us, doesn't it? When I am in sin, it makes me look at myself because I sin to satisfy myself. When I'm focused on myself, I'm not focused on anybody else, especially not God. And I'm already programmed to think, because of my sin, that I'm the center of the universe and the world revolves around me. Just ask any child. Do you have to teach them to be selfish? No, it comes very naturally. Do you have to teach them to say no? Do you have to teach them to disobey? Do you have to teach them to lie? No, it's natural. They already believe the world revolves around themselves. The problem, I would say, even in our culture today, is that the parents are backing up that notion by making their world revolve around their children. That communicates to the children that the world really does revolve around me. Wow. Maybe that's a whole nother sermon series. Our culture today promotes and encourages selfishness. Where's Dad? What is this? It's Apple. What is this called? It's called an iPhone, right? You know what I listen to on my iPhone? I listen to iTunes on my iPhone, right? You can get into the iCloud, and you can get married and live in an iPad, okay? I totally stole that off somebody. Don't think that I'm that clever. There is no room for I in marriage, except at the very end before the A. World doesn't revolve around me. My flesh really wants it to. But reality is, it doesn't. And the reality is that God has a bigger purpose and a bigger plan for me and Joanna being together than my satisfaction, my happiness, my accomplishments, my hobbies, even the kids, is so much bigger than that, guys. So much bigger than that. Because we marry with stars in our eyes, we don't see this reality. During dating, there is usually little daily responsibility or pressure. Anybody relate to that? I get to go see her. We get to go on a date. We get to kiss a little bit. She goes home. I go home. She didn't have to hear me snore. You know. She didn't have to see me really be selfish. I get to put on a good show for her. Right? Early in the relationship, appreciation and approval are freely given. Right? How many of you were stinking selfish and rude when you first started dating your spouse? I don't remember, was I? No, man, I really put on a good show. She got to see the best of what I could do. Why did that change when we got married? For a lot of men, I'll be honest with you, it's like I bagged the babe. That's what my car said. Okay, don't laugh at me. Our rental car for our wedding day said Hunter Pete bags babe. I kid you not. Somebody referenced that on Facebook the other day. We get our quarry. We accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. We got married. Yes, now we're done. I don't have to pursue her anymore. I don't have to court her anymore. I don't have to show her love anymore. I don't have to tell her what she wants to hear anymore. Yeah. Appreciation and approval are freely given. Selfishness robs the relationship of romance. You ever think about that? You're like, well, we haven't been able to be intimate in a long time. Well, you've been a selfish jerk. And most of my desire sometimes can be that my desire for sex is because I'm being selfish. Sex is a part of the relationship, and we'll get to this in later studies. I'm not going to tell you which week because you might skip all the others until we get there. But sex was put into the marriage. Is that the time? Holy cow. All right. Getting too long-winded here. All right. We'll get to sex in a little bit. All right. Selfishness robs the relationship of its romance. Our selfish nature focuses on and becomes critical of our spouse's weaknesses, mistakes, and their failures to meet our expectations. Our disappointment and disapproval of our spouse can lead to him or her feeling rejected, discouraged, anger, and bitterness, resulting in even lower performance. Our selfish nature even seeks to justify our rejection of our spouse. Ultimately, when husbands and wives are selfish, what is the result? Isolation. Like I said in the beginning, it's hard to know what the battle is and who we're supposed to be fighting if we don't know what we're up against. If I had known when I read the reviews on marriage that all of these things might go wrong, I would at least know how I needed to proceed in marriage to try and counter some of these things. One of the main things that I did not see growing up was the resolving of conflict. And I would say that that is one issue in today's culture that is almost non-existent. We have conflict If we don't talk about it for long enough, it just gets swept under the rug, and then we just act like nothing's wrong. And the whole time, it's this oozing, festering sore that's just sitting there ready to squirt pus all over us. I never got to see, oh, I'm getting emotional, my parents resolve conflict. And so when I got married to Joanna, and we had conflict, I thought our marriage was doomed because I never saw my parents have conflict. I want to leave you this. This is the closing of my sermon. In 1 Peter chapter 3, there's some verses about marriage. I'm not going to go into those right now. So, Peter, this is a marriage sermon. That might be fitting. But I wanted to read what came after. Because it's like, this is what husbands and wives should do. And by the way, this is verses 8 through 13 that I'm going to read. And this is the oh, by the way, at the end of it. It says, finally, all of you have unity of mind. It's hard to be selfish and self-centered and go your own way when you have unity of mind. Sympathy. You might want to write this reference down. I think it's on the bulletin. You can pick one up on the way out. Unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Coming out of these verses on marriage, it says to have these things. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling. You see how this ties into every relationship? But especially in the marriage relationship, this is important. But on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from seeking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? You see, you can be sitting here tonight in a bad marriage. And I can read you this list of 5 threats, and you can say, oh, stink, I've got all 5. And you can think, well, it's done. It's over. In 2002, that's where Joanne and I were. We had every threat. I was wrapped up in addiction. But God used a testimony to slap me up the side of the head and get me going down the straight and narrow. Because He wasn't done with me. And He wanted to not just show us what God could do in our marriage and between 2 imperfect people, but He had He had a plan. You see, we had 2002, so we had a 7, a 5, and a 2-year-old. And those boys, especially the older 2, they got to see God put our marriage back together. And that is a living testimony. They got to see God transform 2 lives, save their parents' marriage. We were everything but divorced. So coming out of this, I want you to hear that if you're in that place right now, you don't have to stay there. If you've lost hope for your marriage, you need to know that God can transform it and revive it. He brought His own Son back from the dead. He can bring your marriage